Okay, now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. And I don't have a whole big long bio about him, but I think the coolest thing is the fact that we went up there and visited in Du Bois, Wyoming, not Dubois, Du Bois. We went up last year and we went to his National Museum of Military Vehicles. And out in front is an M48, and they painted it with the numbers of one of our members who lives in Idaho, and I think it was just happenstance. And the other, I think, absolutely incredible thing was their M48 that's inside the museum. Bob Peavy walked up there and went, "Oh, that's my tank," and it was praying for Slack, right? Is that the wrong museum? Oh, Jesus, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You had the Way City tank there. Anyway, okay. Just one little other tidbit, and then I'll sit down so I stop blathering. So, Dan was living and had a horse farm up in Du Bois, and they have a 4th of July parade in Du Bois, and Dan's fantasy was to drive an
M4 Sherman tank.
M4 Sherman in that parade. So he went out and found an M4 Sherman, and he drove it, and all of a sudden, he's got 500 military vehicles, and most of them are tanks, in his museum, and 2/3 are restored. So he's got 500 vehicles, and 2/3 are in this museum, and it's the most awesome museum, just absolutely awesome. So, Dan, please.
Well, I'm flattered to be here with all of you, and I've been given a few minutes to talk about anything of my choosing. You might think I'm going to talk about the museum. I'm not. What I want to do instead is I want to talk about how you and how your service in Vietnam is being remembered in history. I thought that's something, so I'm a historian more than anything else. I tell people when they come to the museum that we're running a bait and switch program at the museum, that we use the vehicles as bait, but once people come, what we really want to talk about is honoring the service and sacrifice of every veteran and every veteran's family, as well as our active military. And secondly, we want to educate next generations on the history of American freedom. So we can get them there to look at a tank, but once we've got them, we work to give them good information to help their decision making and to help their pride in being Americans for the remainder of their lives. And I thought that one of the things I've learned here in the course of working with the museum and working with military history is I've learned that you sure can't find out what a veteran did, and you can't find out about veteran service expecting the veteran to talk about it. Veterans will talk to themselves, maybe they'll talk to their families, but veterans on the whole just don't talk about themselves. They don't talk about their service. They're too humble. And it takes somebody like me who has not served in the military both to brag up what those of you who did serve have done, the experiences, something about the experiences that you've had. Only 0.4% of Americans today are serving in the military. Only 7% of the American population are veterans, and that percentage is declining. So we're really at risk here in the United States of having most Americans have no connection and know almost nothing about military service, and that can't stand. So what we're doing at the museum is we're working to better connect those of us who have not served with the small percent of Americans and all of you here in the room who have served. And I thought that rather than me talk about tanks or talk about museum matters, I was thinking, I wonder how many of you know how your Vietnam War experience is now being recorded in history. You certainly all know what your individual experiences were, but it takes a little bit of time for, you need a passage of time. We've had a passage of decades to really gain a historic perspective. And I thought I would share as a historian, tell you a little bit about how your life experiences, the Vietnam War part of it, are being remembered in history. The first thing is, and this is what we're passing along in the museum every single day, these things I'm about to tell you. The first thing is, when you went to Vietnam, you were fighting against a very stacked deck. You were fighting an adversary that had far more combat experience than any of you. You were fighting an adversary that had been in combat in one form or other for multiple decades. You were fighting an adversary who knew every inch of that battlefield. When I'm talking to, I'm sure that most of you know the history, but the adversary you're fighting was fighting the Japanese in World War II. Then from 45 to 54, your adversary was fighting the French. Very used to fighting against superior firepower and developing the tactics on how best to do it. There was a period of consolidation after the French left before the war really resumed, first against the South Vietnamese, and then when all of you went into Vietnam against you for another 10 years. So you were fighting an adversary that, again, had decades of combat experience. A lot of you went over to Vietnam for one deployment. I realize a number of you had multiple deployments, but that didn't compare with people that were on that battlefield for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years. When I'm talking to young people, I give them the example of laser tag. That's something that younger generations can relate to, and I ask them, can you imagine having a team laser tag? Going into a laser tag battlefield, it's dark. You've never been in that room. So you're just, everything, you're going to have to discover absolutely everything about what's on that battlefield. Now, how would you like to do that playing against a team that has been fighting in that laser tag room every single day the last 10 years? They know absolutely everything about it. The deck is absolutely stacked against each one of you who went to serve in combat in Vietnam. Younger Americans understand that. It's like, that's not fair at all. That's nothing. I would want to do that. They'd have the drop on us everywhere. Now add to it that not only did they know that battlefield absolutely in detail when they fought on it, every day for 10 or 20 years. Add to it that they're the only ones that could escape out of that room. There were concealed doors they could go out, and they could take a break, and they could take themselves out of harm's way. They could go to Laos. They could go north of the 17th parallel. You couldn't. And they could go, they had developed infrastructure underground that you often could be walking right over, or driving your tanks right over, or driving other vehicles right over, and never know that they're there. They had all of the advantage. It was a stacked deck. So how did all of you do? What does history show how all of you did? Well, you went in, you fought in the area of Leatherneck Square, you fought in the area of the DMC, you fought at Khe Sanh, hull down, you fought in the Battle of the City of Hue, with all the odds stacked against you. Now, what in the world did President Johnson and Secretary of Defense McNamara and General Westmoreland, what business did they have sending some of you into the Battle of Khe Sanh? You're against an overwhelmingly superior number of enemy, where we couldn't even land airplanes on that airfield. Some of you were there hulled down in your M48s, and just having an unbelievable amount of rocket fire and every other kind of harm from, again, a vastly superior number of enemy, while you're really put there kind of as bait. Let's see if we put you Americans in there, maybe we can lure a lot of enemy to come out in the open and see if we can get good body count with our aircraft and with other superior firepower. What kind of a situation is that for all of you? And how about the Battle of the City of Hue? I'm going to guess not a single person in this room who deployed to Vietnam was trained in urban combat before you deployed. You weren't supposed to be in urban combat in Vietnam. And all of a sudden, the battle for the city of Hue, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong take it on January 30th. You all counterattack beginning January 31st. And without any preparation, Your command didn't remember Marine doctrine for urban warfare. The people sitting here had not a day's training, and yet you took it on. And you went into the most fierce urban combat since World War II, and you did it building by building, room by room, block by block for a full month. You took 1,800 casualties, suffered 1,800 casualties. 80% of the city was rubble by the time you were done driving the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong out of there, and you absolutely kicked butt. You stepped up, whether it was Khe Sanh, whether it was Hue, whether it was Leatherneck Square, you absolutely kicked butt. And every one of you came home winners. Every single one of you came home winners. You came home winners in an environment where there was a lot of political controversy about the war. Now, on the one hand, politics, so what? That's politicians. On the other hand, what a disservice to all of you to come back to the United States where, because of the political controversy that had nothing to do with your valor, that had nothing to do with your combat, that had nothing to do with the success that you achieved in extremely tough conditions, what a disservice for you to come back and be disrespected. Just absolutely unforgivable. What's the price that Vietnam veterans as a whole paid for your battlefield success across the board in Vietnam? What I tell people in the museum when I'm giving a tour, nobody understands, nobody knows these numbers. I tell people coming through the museum, do you realize here in such tough and diverse combat conditions, playing against a stacked deck, playing against as tough an adversary as any American military has ever fought against, do you realize what the price of all of these battlefield victories was to our Vietnam veterans? I tell them it was a 1/3 casualty rate. That's not what people think, but that's what the number is. We've got over 58,000 names on the memorial wall. I'm sure all of you know that. But then you add to it the severely wounded, not all the Purple Hearts. We issued about 300,000 Purple Hearts to Americans serving in combat in Vietnam. But we use the number at the museum, we use the number of 153,000 wounded. That's the number of Americans who were wounded severely enough to be hospitalized with their wounds. So add 153,000 casualties to 58,000 casualties. Now here's the big number, Agent Orange casualties. I'm sure a number of you are Agent Orange casualties. I'm sure a number of people that would come to these reunions in the past aren't here because of Agent Orange now. On top of the battlefield valor, on top of the battlefield success, you suffered through having your own government, having President Johnson, having Secretary of Defense McNamara, having General Westmoreland sprayed 20 million gallons of Agent Orange on you, knowing that it had trace amounts of the most deadly form of dioxin at the time, going by the initials of TCDD, so deadly that 3 or 4 parts per million can kill a person. And you were sprayed with 20 million gallons of that with the senior political and military leadership of the United States knowing what they were doing and denying to you that it was harmful to human health. And then those of you who were fortunate enough to survive your deployment came home. For the next 20 years, until 1991, as you and others like you who served in Vietnam suffered the effects of Agent Orange, sometimes dying, sometimes being severely debilitated, but continuing to survive. As you raised the question, well, how come it's just Vietnam vets that are having all of these ailments? It must be tied to our service, and in particular, was it tied to our exposure to Agent Orange? Because it was everywhere. Until 1991, you were gaslighted, you were stonewalled, you were denied that this had anything to do with your military service, and the whole time it was a lie. And you suffered through it, and you didn't get the disability you deserved. Your families didn't get the support you deserved. Since the Agent Orange Act of 1991, Our research shows 650,000 Vietnam veterans have been treated for Agent Orange. Now that sounds like a big number, but that's a very incomplete and inaccurate number. A lot more than 650,000 Vietnam veterans are or were Agent Orange casualties. That 650,000 is only Vietnam veterans who were treated for Agent Orange. And nobody was treated for Agent Orange until the Agent Orange Act of 1991. The leadership denied that there was such a thing as an Agent Orange casualty. So everybody who served in Vietnam who died of any reason prior to 1991 needs to be added to that number of 650,000 Agent Orange casualties among Vietnam veterans. But we don't know what that number is. So we use 650,000, knowing it's not big enough, and add that to the more than 200,000 casualties. Now let's add PTSD casualties. The VA's number for Vietnam veterans still suffering from PTSD in 2019 is 271,000 Vietnam veterans. Now that's not the world of PTSD casualties. That doesn't include anybody who came back from Vietnam suffering from PTSD who died of any reason prior to 2019. The true number would be 4 or 5 times that, but we don't know that number. So we use 271,000. When you add those categories of casualties up, we tally between 1.1 and 1.2 million casualties among Agent Orange veterans out of a total of 3.4 million veterans who were deployed to Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War era. That's a 1/3 casualty rate. No group of American veterans have suffered a 1/3 casualty rate. You fought in the toughest conditions. You were successful in every major mission. You defeated an enemy who had home court advantage and far more combat experience, and you suffered a higher rate of casualties than any other group of American veterans. What I can tell you is that as you have lived your lives since you came back from Vietnam, if you've wondered from time to time, do people know what you did? Are they remembering? Are they learning about what you did? I can tell you that history remembers what you did. I can tell you that in the museum, we pass along your history to the best of our ability every single day. We make every single day Veterans Day. We make every single day Memorial Day. And we pulled out the stops, at least from our perspective and our scale. We pulled out the stops to to provide the most tribute to Vietnam veterans, with the idea that you have received the least appreciation. You have performed on the battlefield with complete success and the highest valor in tough circumstances, and you paid the highest price. And so I can assure everybody here that your stories, your valor, and your sacrifice are honored and passed along and remembered to everybody who comes to the museum. That was 40,000 people this year. It'll be more than 40,000 people that was more than 40,000 people last year. It'll be more than 40,000 people this year. And so for me to have an opportunity to come here, when I came out of my room and I saw all of you and I just thought, man, these are the people right here. These are the people who did all that. These are the people who have not been adequately appreciated, in some instances abused, disrespected. These are everybody here are American heroes who are going down in history. That's the point here, is how are you going down in history? When you're in your graves, how are you going down in history? You're going down in history as Americans who stepped up in tough circumstances, who won, who came home winners, and lived humble lives without ticker tape parades and without the kind of honor and respect that you should have had earlier in your lives, but that you are getting now and that you will have now for the rest of your lives, partly at the museum and partly because everything I'm telling you with historic perspective, with decades going by, this is how you're being remembered in American history. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Take a bow. Take a bow. We'd like to give a presentation to our guest speaker. We have a handmade plaque, a Vietnam Tankers plaque, that we're going to hopefully put in your office.
Yep.
And we also got a set of bookends. You want to take that? Set of bookends that, again, they're handmade by, actually it's one of our Navy Cross winners, awardees, excuse me, Harold Renchie, who's up in Montana. But we like to, and we also have a replica. This is our logo for this reunion. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna send these here. I'm gonna mail these here for
Thank you. Okay.
these here.